In Yes, Actually, I Am a Biologist news, a biology professor has been fired, and he says it's because he in class said that sex is determined by chromosomes. Apparently, this is unacceptable. So you will remember Justice Jackson when she was being confirmed for the position of United States Supreme Court Justice. She was asked to define woman, and she somewhat famously said, "I'm not a biologist." Well, what does an actual biologist think? This biologist thinks XY. Apparently, that was the wrong answer. That was the wrong answer. Sex is not determined by chromosomes, apparently. Let's learn a little bit more about this story. A biology professor at a Texas community college has claimed that he was fired for religious preaching after he taught a lesson about how sex is determined by X and Y chromosomes, which is pretty basic biology. It's pretty easy, right? I mean, you learned this stuff probably in middle school, if not earlier. This is not exactly the most complicated stuff, and he's teaching something that you should be able to teach to a fifth grader. But he's getting fired for it because it's the wrong thing. Jonathan Varkey, who has taught at the college for 20 years, 20 years he's been a teacher at this college, claims he was accused by his administration of religious preaching and let go after he discussed the human reproductive system during a lesson in November 2022, which apparently was so controversial for the proposition that men and women are determined by chromosomes that 4 students who didn't like the wrong thing walked out of the lecture hall. The First Liberty Institute sent a letter to the school on behalf of the veteran educator demanding reinstatement. Also, the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression is also involved in this case. So we got a lot of people from a lot of angles saying, quote, "The college fired him for teaching basic and widely accepted concepts of biology." Yeah, I mean, this seemed to be correct. Sex is based on chromosomes, but now apparently that's the wrong thing. This is the kind of wrong thing that leads us to the idea of teaching women they have bonus holes, which sounds like the most degrading thing I can possibly imagine. And it's coming out of the far left medical institutions. For those of you who missed that memo, there is a medical establishment now saying that because of transgender women who are not women, but they don't have a vagina. And so, because they don't have one, because they're not actually women, what should we refer to the thing that women have? Well, we can't call it a vagina because that would be, not acceptable. So, what if we called it a bonus hole? Hey, women, did you know that you're nothing but a bunch of holes? How misogynistic is that? That has got to be the most misogynistic thing I've ever heard of in my life. Wow. The left has really gone completely outside batshit crazy. Yeah. Varkey, who is an adjunct professor, has taught human anatomy and psychology to more than 1,500 students since 2003 because he's been there for a hot minute. During his 20-year employment as a biology professor at the college, he consistently received exemplary performance reviews and has never been subject to any sort of disciplinary action. So apparently the college was so incensed by this guy saying men and women are determined by chromosomes that despite having no problems in his 20-year history, despite him being there for 20 years, despite positive reviews, they fired him immediately. Fun times. Throughout that time, he never discussed with any students his personal views, religious or otherwise, on the question of human gender or sexuality. The law firm claimed that 4 students stormed out of the hall when Varkey stated, consistent with the study of human biology and religious beliefs, that sex was determined by chromosomes X and Y, which is what I thought. That's what I thought. I thought sex was determined by X and Y. If XX, female. If XY, male. If something else, then, we'll have a discussion about it. But that's something like 1 out of 5,000 people. So can we talk about the other 49.99 people first and the basic biologies? No, apparently we can't. In 2 decades of teaching these basic, unremarkable concepts, no student has complained because for 20 years, this has been widely accepted as right. And now apparently not so much. The X and Y chromosomes, also known as the sex chromosomes, determine biological sex. That's what I thought. Females inherit an X chromosome, or more to the point, two of them, while males inherit a Y chromosome. So men are more diverse. So there's that. In January, he received a notice of discipline and termination of employment and contract letter stating the school received numerous complaints about his religious preaching, discriminatory comments about homosexuals and transgender individuals, anti-abortion rhetoric, and misogynistic banter. Wow, they're just really pulling out all the stops here, right? He says the most basic, unremarkable biological fact possibly known, and they just break out every possible label to label him. What wonderful tolerance. The college's letter also allegedly stated that his teaching pushed beyond the bounds of academic freedom with his personal opinions that were offensive to many individuals in the classroom. Wow. So, so the issue isn't apparently that he was providing his personal opinions. The issue is apparently that he was providing personal opinions that were offensive. So I guess if he had shared his personal opinions and they were not offensive, that would have been okay. But it's only so is the problem that he's providing personal opinions or personal opinions you don't disagree with. Did you go to college and not expect to hear opinions that you disagreed with? If so, that says a lot about the state of college today. That you are expecting to go to college and not hear an opinion that you don't necessarily agree with. Okay. In other words, he was fired for teaching true and widely accepted concepts. The statement he made are supported by research and consistent with professional experience, education, and the most basic tenuous grasp on reality, which is not a thing that we can necessarily count on anymore from our institutions, apparently even of higher learning, which apparently somehow failed Justice Jackson in her pursuit of higher education, despite being a member of the Supreme Court, somehow failed to understand what men and women were when asked. Not quite sure how she got not only through law school, but to the US Supreme Court without understanding this basic biology. I understand that lawyers are not necessarily biologists, but we do in America have what's called a liberal arts education, as opposed to some countries in the world. So as long as we're talking about differences in education versus the United States of other countries, right? So in the United States, a law degree is a graduate degree. It is something you get after a four-year degree. This is not necessarily true in other countries in the world. This is not necessarily true, for example, in the UK. In the UK, a JD is called an LLB, a Bachelor of Legal Letters, right? In the United States, there's some law schools that still use this nomenclature, LLB. In fact, I think, like, for example, Ruth Bader Ginsburg had an LLB, and some of the other justices in recent memory had LLBs. And I think there's still a few law schools out there still using LLB, although the more common designation these days in law, at least in the United States, is JD, because the lawyers got a little bit pissed about having to go to law school and only getting another bachelor's degree. It's like I went to grad school and all I got is a bachelor's degree. How's that work, right? So in other countries in the world, you might go straight out of high school or the equivalent straight into law, and you will study law. And as it happens in other countries in the world, you tend to, as compared to the United States, have less of a liberal arts education. If you're studying engineering, you will study much more engineering compared to engineering in the United States, where you will be expected to take a wide range of basic classes in baseline knowledge. So you'll have to take, English classes and literature classes and all kinds of classes that don't necessarily pertain to engineering, because we think as Americans that it's good for people to have a baseline underlying knowledge about kind of all the things, so they at least have surface level understanding of everything, and then we teach them how to do the one thing, as opposed to other countries like, well, let's just teach them to do the one thing. So how do you get through a basic liberal arts education and not understand what men and women are is beyond me. Varkey was described as a devout Christian who apparently also volunteers as an associate pastor at his church and hosts a Bible teaching radio ministry, which, okay, fine. People can be religious. It's in the First Amendment. I checked and everything, right? So if he volunteers as an associate pastor and he teaches some radio and he likes to talk about the Bible in addition to talking about the biology, then, that's cool. The Catholics in particular have had a long, rich history of looking at science and, you know, as a instrument of faith, although not necessarily always. We can point to counterexamples throughout history. Galileo comes to mind, and people like him, where the Catholic Church necessarily wasn't super accepting of principles like Earth revolves around the sun, But there has been also a history of the Vatican in particular looking at science as a way of understanding God. So he thinks, hey, I am a Christian. I'm a religious guy. I believe that God created everything. And for me to study biology is for me to study God's creation. That is a perfectly consistent view about, what God's creation is like. And then how that creation came to be can get into issues of faith. But, the idea he wants to do both, and he's really good at both. So what's the problem? I don't know. Dr. Varkey is the latest example of an everyday American who lost his job to toxic cancel culture that is infecting employers across the country, the Liberty Institute said in a statement. Like millions of religious Americans, Dr. Varkey has a sincerely held belief that God created humanity, male and female, which, is what it says in the Bible. God created them, man and woman. Yes, I remember that line from Genesis. Right. Which, sexual bifurcation is kind of readily apparent, not only in the human species, but pretty much most species in this world. So, shouldn't be a completely controversial concept that there are men and there are women and there are biological differences, but apparently that's unacceptable. His faith teaches that one sex is ordained by God, that one should love and care for their body that God gave them, and one should not attempt to alter or change that, whether through drugs or surgical means, which, is an opinion. And if he's asked his opinion or he wants to talk about his opinion, that's what I think. I think biology is biology and we should accept the biology and, we shouldn't alter basic underlying biological realities, which, if he had the opposite view, if he had the opposite opinion, presumably the college would have no problem him expressing that. But they have problem expressing his viewpoint. So only certain viewpoints apparently allowed at the college. In a letter to the college, the law firm accused the college of violating multiple laws that protect Americans from being punished for holding expressing beliefs, such as, for example, the Civil Rights Act, which prohibits discrimination on the basis of religion. I believe it's Title VI, as a matter of fact. So yes, you're not allowed to do that. When decision makers at St. Philip's College terminated Dr. Varkey because of his religious beliefs and classroom statements about biology, they violated several federal and state laws, including the First Amendment, the Texas Religious Freedom Act, and Title VII. Damn it, I thought it was Title VI. Now, Title VI is race. Title VII is religious freedom. Sometimes keeping which title is which straight in your head, you get them a little bit confused. But that's okay. We can make mistakes and press on. I was one away. All right, well, maybe next time. Dr. Varkey is confident this matter can be resolved without resort to legal action. Yeah, I doubt that very, very severely. I do not see this being resolved without legal action. There's no way the college is going to back down. We've seen this before. I have seen this play before. I have seen this movie before. He's going to have to go to court. They're going to fight him every way. They're going to, it's going to be a pain in the ass. He asked the college to reinstate him to his prior position so he can resume teaching, and other professors and employees be spared similar experiences. Yeah, so the college has been given an opportunity to back down and be like, our bad. Sorry about that. You can have your job back. So they've been given an opportunity. I feel like there's no chance on this earth that they're going to actually take advantage of that opportunity. We're going to court, baby. The law firm says that public universities cannot fire professors for teaching actual science in a science room, which, this is. It's a science room. Let's learn science. It's harmful for academic freedom. It's also harmful to religious liberty, as the college is sending a message that people of faith are not welcome and need not apply. And he's like, well, I can't help noticing that in the biology, there's X and there's Y. And some people, all they have is X. And some people, they have a Y. And I can't help noticing that this provides some material differences in how the body develops and certain biological features that they have. and the ability to bear offspring, for example, and so forth and so on. The letter also added that Dr. Varkey is the latest example of an everyday American who's losing his job to toxic cancel culture. Thus, that brings us to the end of the story about a biology professor who apparently has been fired by a public community college in Texas for teaching the proposition that men and women are determined by biological factors, such as chromosomes. Wow, amazing. This completely uncontroversial position, which was uncontroversial, I don't know, what do you want to say? 5 years ago, 10 years ago tops, is apparently now so controversial that it is utterly unacceptable. So the absolute the absolute opinion that literally every single person would have 10 years ago is now apparently so unacceptable that we have to fire this guy immediately after 20 years, good reviews, and no other problems. So things are not really looking great. The law firm has sent a letter. Also, the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education has sent a letter involved in this. So I'm thinking that there's a lot going on here, and we'll see how this story progresses. And at least for the moment, that brings us to the end of discussion of this story.